Mirë se vini në shtëpinë e gazetarëve, Reporting House, ku jemi mbledh sot për me fol jo vetëm për William Walkerin që e kemi mysafir të cilin e njeh këtë Kosova, po për librin e tij. Është interesant që 20 vjet mas lufte, William Walker, ambasadori William Walker, i cili u boi njoftur në Kosovë për udhëheqjen e misionit Kosovo Verification Mission, apo misionit verifikues të Kosovës, i cili erdhi në Kosovë në 88-ën si rezultat i një marrëveshje që u nënshkru mes Holbrukut edhe Millosheviqit për me mbikëqyr anëpushimin mes UÇK-s edhe forcave jugoslave. Kjo ishte arsyeja pse William Walkeri u dërgu, mirë po, ai përfundoi të u bë më i njoftuni për shkak të dëshmisë që e dha në mënyrë shumë të sinqertë edhe të papolitizume të dëshmisë të tij për masakrën e Reçakut. Libri i tij është shumë interesant dhe mundeni me ble dhe me lexue dhe është në gjuhën shqipe, është botuar në gjuhën shqipe pa 25 vjetëve. Unë me zotin Walker kisha dashur me fillu diskutimin prej momentit kur ky e tregon kontekstin me shku drejt te masakra e Reçakut, po në fund, në konkluzionet e tij, në libër, William Walker e shtron një pyetje të mirë dhe interesante, na kallëzon çka ka qenë të ndodh në çat kohë që ka ndodhur masakra e Reçakut, në botë kallëzon ka pas plot vrasje edhe më të mëdha se gati 50 veta që u mytën Reçak. Do të thonë për ne që jetonim këtu, krejt koncentrimi ishte në çka po ndodhte në Kosovë. Po në çat kohë kanë qenë të ndodh viktima nga luftat shumë më të mëdha se ajo e Reçakut. Për çata zoni Walker, kisha fillu me ty në çet moment, pse mendon që imagjinatën e botës dhe të intervenimit e mur Reçaku e jo diçka tjetër?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think Reçak, as you said, or as I said, was a intense but fairly small massacre. There were other ones much bigger in size and in horror than what happened in the village of Reçak in 1998. The context was a combination of things. First, there was the effect of what had happened in Bosnia somewhat earlier, in which the international community felt guilty that it had stood by when there were very, very violent outbreaks of violence in Srebrenica, in many parts of Bosnia-Herzegovina. There was also, in my opinion, some very special parts of the context in which Reçak happened that I mention in the book. And it's kind of hard to explain, but let me try very quickly. The KBM came in here in October, and here it was just 2.5 months later. There were a lot of stories of previous massacres here. The Yashadi family was obviously well known here, but not around the world. One of the reasons for that was that I don't know if the journalists got to the Yashadi site and reported right away what had happened. But I was able to get out to Reçak within a mere 8-10 hours of when the killing had taken place. So there was the immediacy of my and the KBM's arrival at the site, and I said what I saw. I just explained what I had seen and a conclusion that I and others drew from it. And it went around the world in terms of the news that an international mission head had said this was a massacre or a crime against humanity. And the world had to react, and it did, with front page stories, etc. Now, normally that would have died over time. That would have evaporated as other massacres took place here and elsewhere in the world. But there were a couple of things that happened that were happening at that time. And I mention them in the book, and maybe some of them have nothing to do with what happened, but the leaders of the contact group, the leaders of the large nations that were involved and worried about what was happening in Kosovo, each one of the leaders, persons, had reasons to try and divert attention from something that they were involved in. The one I know best, because I was following the news in Washington, was of course Bill Clinton, the president, was being being hounded by our Congress. They were going to try and impeach him, and there was constant stories in the newspapers about Monica Lewinsky, the scandals, and all this sort of thing. So Bill Clinton, I admire him as a president, but at that moment he was very underwater with his personal problems. In London, Tony Blair, another principal at the time, he was having serious problems with the Parliament. Every day he was being called up for at the parliamentary sessions and criticized for one or another policy. In Germany, Chancellor Schroeder was also, he had just come into office. There was a lot of arguments in Germany about whether he was going to take Germany in a more militaristic way, were they going to be more involved in NATO and that sort of thing. So he had his problems. All of the leaders on that very day were involved in issues that they wanted to divert attention from. And lo and behold, the news comes out about a massacre in Reçakut, and with the memories of Bosnia-Herzegovina, with the memories of places where the United Nations and the international community had not reacted to what was obviously a serious matter and let people be killed without recourse, it all came together. And boom. Then President Milosevic and his cohorts in Belgrade, in their attempt to try to explain what had happened in Reçakut as a military battle, the KLA was engaged, it was two armies fighting each other, etc. That went from that to just almost announcing that anything had happened, and claiming that I and others had reclothed the bodies and moved the evidence around, etc. Every day he seemed to make a decision that brought the issue back to the front pages of the international press. As I say, he made mistakes, tactical mistakes, that propelled it once again every day to the front pages of the press. And so the leaders of the free world, as we call them, including Russia, decided that something had to be done. And that was when NATO got pulled into it.
So it's interesting what you say, that because of how he tried to camouflage what went on, it actually brought more and more attention that he was lying and that what you were saying was truth.
Exactly.
But nevertheless, the book goes in detail explaining the kind of influence that Serbia's propaganda was having on other nations, not on the American officers of the Kosovo verification mission, but on Finnish, on French, on Italian. Can you tell us a little bit about that background of what was going on behind the scenes in the KVM mission, something you explain in the book very well?
I'm not sure I can. I was in Pristina, I was in Kosovo, we were just building up the mission. We were just getting going. We were just getting some of our verifiers, which is what we called our monitors. And so I was concerned with that.
But you could have ended up in Montenegro, you said at some point. You were in Montenegro.
Oh, yeah. I went to Montenegro on the 15th of January. And I flew over there because we were trying to annoy Milosevic. We were trying to show him that the KVM was in fact something real. And it was suggested to me, I don't remember by who, maybe by Dick Holbrooke, maybe by Madeleine Albright, maybe by the French government, I have no memory. But the idea was that I would go to Montenegro, I would meet the, I guess he was the prime minister at the time, and I would ask for permission to open a KVM office in Montenegro. Now, Montenegro was in this strange relationship with Serbia as part of a federation. And the idea was that if he permitted us to open an office there, it would show that the KVM was not just for Kosova, but it had an outreach into a part of Serbia, Montenegro. And he readily agreed. I think, as I remember, he and Milosevic were in a bit of a political struggle between them, and he was more than happy to let the KVM open an office in Podgorica. So
if you would delay that return, it would have been your deputy, a Frenchman, who would have gone to Reçakut. Now, can you explain to us what would it, in the book you go deeper and try to imagine what if someone else went there? What if not the right person was seeing those bodies and explaining from the gut what they saw? Like, what would have happened if your deputy went there, Frenchman instead of you?
Well, my French deputy was a French Foreign Service officer whose name was Gabriel Keller. And Gabriel came to me in a sort of strange way, which is in the book. The French Foreign Ministry was very upset that I, an American, had been named head of mission. They were very upset that they thought I was declaring that I only wanted one deputy, and they insisted that if I had one deputy, it had to be a Frenchman. And I ended up with 6 deputies. Thus I learned how European politics work. But the French government always insisted that Gabriel Keller, Ambassador Keller, was my principal deputy, so that if I stood aside, if I was traveling, if I was otherwise occupied, Gabriel Keller would speak for the KVM. And I have often asked myself that question. If I had not been here, if I had not arrived the night of the 15th, when the event took place during the night, if I had still been in Montenegro and Gabriel Keller had gone to see what was happening or what had happened in Reçakut, I think he would have spoken very differently from what I said. Number one, Gabriel claimed that he, alone among my deputies, understood the Serb mentality. He accepted the fact that Belgrade had to act very strongly when faced with the KLA, when faced with an armed insurrection. He was also, as many French diplomats are, very reluctant to use strong words. So if he had gone to Reçakut, I think, I'm only guessing, I think he would have explained it as something has happened here. There are 2 sides to the story. The government says it was a battle between the KLA and the Serb security forces. On the other side, there are people who say that it was a massacre. I do not know. I, Gabriel Keller, do not know. And I am calling for an intense investigation. And I am calling on the world to look into this and examine it, which is what diplomats usually do.
So why, Mr. Walker, did you not do what diplomats usually do? A man of 30 to 40-year experience as a diplomat, ambassador, you'd been to El Salvador, you were not unexperienced. Why did you say what you said?
Why did I say it?
Yes. Why did you say crimes against humanity instead of something bland that would have never made history?
Well, number one, I saw it and I saw the results of something that had happened just hours before. There had been no time for anyone on any side of the issue to change the scene, change the crime scene. And what I saw looked like a massacre, sounded like a massacre. My verifiers, the KVMers who were there, they were out and about. They were picking up bullet casings and that sort of thing. And it was quite obvious that the shooting had come down from the ridge above where the 45 villagers were killed. The evidence was quite clear what had happened. Now, why did I say what I said? Maybe because I came from the American Foreign Service with, as you say, 35 years experience in Latin America, not in Europe. In Europe, diplomacy is handled a little differently than it is in Latin America.
Explain a little differently.
In my Foreign Service, we have a difference. I don't want to exaggerate it, but there is a difference between those who have come into the service and served in London, Paris, Rome, Europe, or even the Far East, Tokyo. Diplomacy there is quite formal. There are certain protocols you don't violate. And in Latin America, I was involved in all sorts of messy situations, the embassy being attacked, all sorts of things, some of which I describe in the book. And it tends to be a more open conversation with the press, with the media, as to what you're seeing or what you think is happening. As I say in the book, I had a very serious event, much like the Reçakut massacre, in which there was a 10-year civil war in El Salvador, and I was there for the last 4 years as ambassador, the American ambassador. We were donating over 50% of the national budget, so we were involved big time in El Salvador. We were on the side of the government, not on the side of the Cuban, Russian-backed FMLN. And in the middle of a final offensive by the guerrillas, in which my residents received a lot of bullets, it was a very dangerous situation, a very horrendous act took place, which was someone went into the the Catholic University, which was a center of leftist thought, and executed 6 Jesuit priests. The execution of 6 Jesuit priests was much more projected into the world. It was a real horror story in which up to the Pope was denouncing the event and also denouncing the American government for not solving it immediately. So when I went before the press in El Salvador, I sort of did what I was describing as the European approach. I said, this happened. Maybe it was the government military, maybe it was the rebels. I don't know. I don't know the proof. I don't have the proof. And I was criticized for trying to cover up a horrendous event. As I say, the Jesuit order, which is worldwide, well respected, up to the Pope, criticized me personally for not coming out and telling what they assumed was the truth.
So in the book you say, some would have said that I wanted with Reçakut to make up what I didn't do in Latin America.
Right. If you go
How did you, in that conversation with yourself, were you making it up?
I have no idea. I really don't know. Not many people, but people have said that. I think if you go onto Wikipedia or onto those sources, you will find people who say that I was atoning for what I had not said in El Salvador by immediately denouncing the government here. I don't think that went through my head, but it might have.
One detail you explain in the book is that your deputy wanted to stay in Kosova after the KVM mission leaves. So the world was clearly on the edge. It was not so obviously as we see it today on the side of Kosovo Albanian civilians.
Well, that's all true.
Yes.
No, my French deputy again, and I speak somewhat harshly about him in the book. He was really my biggest problem. You know, I worried about Mr. Milosevic. I worried about
but it's not
Deputy
just the
Prime
French.
Minister Shinovich. But my French deputy, as you mentioned, after all this had taken place, and we were evacuating, and I was given instructions, all KVMers had to exit Kosovo because there was the threat of a bombing by NATO. And we had a very dramatic exit, all 1,200 verifiers in our orange vehicles and all our equipment that we could carry, we all left in one day. And I got to the border with Macedonia first, and I waited till all my people had passed through, and then I was the last to leave, along with my British deputy. Gabriel Keller came to the border accompanied by a two-person team, a personal political consulting team that he had received from Paris, I guess. I never knew who they were or what they were doing. I was introduced to them, but beyond that, I know nothing about them. Anyway, as we were all exiting, Gabriel Keller came and told me that he was not leaving, that he was going to stay on after our removal from the scene. And I don't know whether this was instructions from Paris or whether this was his own decision. When I asked him what he thought he was doing, he said, I'm going to stay here and continue to report on the situation in Kosovo. And I said, Gabriel, you don't understand that we have been instructed, I have been instructed to get everybody out, leaving behind not one person. So if you don't leave, then I'm not leaving. And you will interfere with the exodus that we are undertaking here.
What was happening to your translators? 1,200 verifiers had translators, local translators working for them. Mm-hmm. As we know from the time, Serbs were taking evidence. The Serbian police was evidencing all Kosovo Albanians that were working for internationals or even spying, as they were seen, for internationals. Mm-hmm.
Well, we were
what
very,
did you do with them?
We were very worried because I got the instruction from Vienna to execute our evacuation on the afternoon of whatever the date was. And when I said, you know, how long do we have to get out of here? They said, come out immediately. So I had to call a meeting of all our local staff, Serbs, Albanians, if there were any Roma, I don't know. And I had to tell the local staff that we were leaving. And everybody knew that when we left, the threat of NATO attack was very real. And I told them I had to apologize that we were leaving them to a fate that was not going to be pleasant. I was surprised to be told by young Albanians that were in the audience, don't worry, Ambassador, we know you have to leave, and until you leave, other things cannot start to happen to make the situation better. So they were very understanding, even though it meant real violence. At that point, I had to tell our local staff that we were leaving, but we could not take out with us any non-international staff. And again, they understood completely. At that point, I made one exception to that protocol. And she's here right now. Alma Kelmendi was my interpreter from Albanian to English and English to Albanian. And she had been at my side in every meeting, every event I had been in. So I knew she would be a very specific target when we left. She also had a new baby in her arms, a young baby boy who I had the privilege of somehow becoming his godfather.
He's a big man now, standing in
He's a
front
big
of us.
man now, yeah, he's a big man. I barely recognize him. But anyway, I told Alba that I was going to take her out.
And her baby.
And the baby, well, and her husband, take out the family. Because she had been my voice. When I spoke, when it went into Albanian, sometimes into Serbian, it was her voice, not me. So I think the connection was made that she somehow, was translating in favor of the Albanian side. This was not true, I'm sure, but I told her we would take her and her family out. Her husband, good, patriotic, shqiptari man, said, I'm not being chased out. The Serbs aren't going to make me leave. This is my country. I was born here, and I'm going to stay. So we left him behind. Of course, 6 weeks later, we got the word that Ardi had in fact left the country, fled into Albania under some rough treatment by the Serb forces as he left. And like many other Albanian men here, he had to recognize the reality of what the Serbs might do and did do as the bombing was taking place.
I'm glad you recognize the contribution of translators, rarely recognized. I've spoken to some of them who were part of KDOM that became part of KVM later. They were actually visited by police during the bombing because the police wanted to have informative talk with them. Police came to their home, but cleverly they had changed addresses. Majority of them were not staying in the same address as they were listed during the bombing. This is what happened to your translator, but we have to also talk about something you don't talk in the book, and I've been dying to ask you. What happened to your career after what you said in Reçakut?
Again, to tell you the truth, I don't know. It didn't go very far. Madeleine Albright was the person who selected me, for reasons I'm not sure I understand, to go to Croatia in '97 to be the head of the United Nations Transitional Administration of Eastern Slavonia. And Madeleine Albright, in my opinion, was the most supportive and aggressive in terms of what the KVM should do here. She supported everything I did, everything the mission did, to the best of her ability. She told me several times, Walker, we think you did a good job in Croatia. I personally think you did a good job in Kosova, and don't worry, you will be getting a onward assignment, not to Central America, not to Central Africa, but to some big mission that will show our appreciation. It didn't happen. And 6 months later, I hit mandatory retirement and left. I say in the book, and I've said it a couple of times here, when I left Kosovo, I went through Vienna to see the OSCE that had sent me here. I went to Washington. Not once did any member of the OSCE headquarters, not once did anyone in the State Department at any level ask me anything about my mission in Kosovo, whether I felt I had been right, wrong. It was very strange. There was no lessons learned in terms of what I had experienced here. So my career went nowhere, not as a result, but after the...
You don't think it was some sort of punishment, or you were retiring 6 months later anyway, but what have you been doing last 20 years then? How has your time been spent in retirement?
I've had a very nice retirement. I once heard that if you retire at 60 or 65, men who retire at that age, they go off to a boring retirement, and they usually die within a year or two. For me, that was 25 years ago. I don't know if that is true, but it certainly wasn't true for me. As anyone in the audience who knows me knows, I'm sort of lazy. I'm a procrastinator. It's taken me 25 years to write this book. So I spend a lot of time resting, watching television, catching up on the news. Since November 4th or whatever it was, I haven't watched the news from the United States. I'm I'm kind of upset with how things are going in the United States.
I wanted to talk about Reçakut because that's mostly what you're known for. But there's 3 incidents which I find your testimony is just as important as Reçakut, and I want to talk about that because you negotiated 2 prison exchanges. People never, remember enough things that went well. Reçakut is remembered because of the deaths of civilians and you witnessing them. But you saved, I think, your negotiation and your colleagues, KVM intervention saved about at least 30 people from possibility of ending up dead. You arranged exchange of prisoners between Yugoslav army at the time and the KLA. These were the 2 incidents, and the third that I find very important testimony is the Panda incident testimony you talk about in the book. You were in Kosova when 6 young Serb youths were shot playing pool at the Panda bar, which KLA got labeled for, but as you speak in the book, Serbia years later admits that it had arranged the killing of those boys in order to blame the KLA. I find these 3 elaborations in your book very important. Can you talk about the prisoner exchange and then journalism exchange and then Panda?
Yeah.
Prisoner exchange in particular, how did you arrange that?
In the first meeting with Milosevic when I got here, and we discussed what the KVM was going to do, what our mandate was, he sort of surprised me by telling me that 2 Yugoslav journalists had been kidnapped by the KLA, and they wanted to get them freed, and he gave me the instruction to get them free, and if I couldn't do it, if the KVM couldn't do it, then the Serb military would go get them because they knew where they were. I went to Sean Burns, who was head of the American KDOM, who had good relations with the KLA.
Just to add, these 2 Serb journalists were from Tanjug, the state agency of news in Belgrade.
Right.
They were kidnapped by the KLA?
Kidnapped? No, they were detained by the KLA.
Okay.
One was a photographer, and the other was a writer, I guess, a young man. The photographer was from Belgrade. The young journalist was from Pristina. And anyway, through Sean Burns, I met the KLA representative, and we discussed it, and I told him, arresting journalists is not going to be seen as a positive move by the KLA. And after discussion, not very involved, the KLA agreed to release them. And they released them in a village out someplace.
Did they want something in exchange?
No.
Then not.
What surprised me was they were released, there was some press there, and the press was very interested, and the question was, how were you treated by the KLA? And both journalists said, no problem, we were given food, we were given cigarettes, we were not mistreated. That resulted in the young Pristina journalist essentially being fired. He was about to get married a couple of weeks later. I don't know what happened to the wedding, but he was fired for having said anything remotely positive, the truth about his treatment by the KLA.
Because you were a guest in their house. You explained how you went to visit the journalist after he was released from the KLA, and he ended up fired because he wouldn't accept to say that he was mistreated.
Yeah, he had just told the truth. And I remember we went late at night to a tall building which was essentially occupied by Serb families. And as we struggled up the stairs in the dark, people were helping me, people were applauding. These were Serb families because we had rescued a Serb. That was satisfying. The negotiations to get the soldiers released was much more complicated. Serbia at first said they were not going to release any KLA insurrectionists, and the KLA said, well, if they don't reciprocate, we're not going to release the the young soldiers who had been captured by the KLA. The Serb soldiers who were captured were all conscripts. They were not professional army. They were young men who were obviously quite frightened by all of a sudden being prisoners. But eventually, again, talking to both sides, we got them to exchange the prisoners. We couldn't do it as an exchange because Serbia was not willing to admit that this was an exchange. But we had to release first the Serb soldiers, and then a week or so later, they released the KLA fighters, and I had to say that it had nothing to do with a trade. It was very strange. And I want to make clear that it wasn't my negotiating skills. I was accompanied by Chris Hill, who's now the ambassador in Belgrade. There was someone else there, and we were up in the hills. And it's a point I really want to make, and I'll make it here, but I'll probably repeat it again. I have gotten personal credit for what happened here during the KVM. NATO has gotten a lot of credit for the bombing. UNMIK has got a lot of credit for coming in here and doing things that were needed in the immediate aftermath of the war. The KVM itself, 1,200 internationals from all over Europe came in here, mostly young people, but some older people, unarmed, in a very dangerous situation. As I say in the book, I think we were the only unarmed people in the whole country. And they came in here and they went out to villages, they went out about, they faced danger every day when they went out on patrol. And yet the KVM gets very little credit.
You even had wounded verifiers.
We had a verifier wounded, along with his Albanian interpreter. That was an interesting experience because it was at about the same time as Reçakut, and I was told that one of our verifiers, I believe he was Canadian, and the night before, in his orange vehicle with his interpreter, they had received incoming fire, and they had both been wounded. And we assumed that it was the Serb military that had done this, because we just assumed it. And it turned out that within hours, the KLA took responsibility. They said they had made a mistake. They were sorry. It was unintentional. So that showed to me that the KLA was willing to admit its mistakes. The government in Belgrade never admitted a mistake, never admitted doing anything wrong. And obviously, Kosovo was an open book about bad things being done by Belgrade.
I find that very humble from you, in that you could have ended up not saying anything bad about Albanians, because you became a hero to Kosovar Albanians. Yet, not just now in the conversation, but even in the book, you acknowledge the mistakes that were made by KLA when they confessed they did them. And then you explain also how negotiations got them to behave a lot more professionally than they would, that your argument that journalists must be saved, despite the fact that they were seen as totally propaganda journalists. Tanjuk was saying horrible things about Kosovo Albanians, that they're terrorists, that they belong dead, more or less. That was the discourse at the time. Nevertheless, you argued your case with KLA and you made our soldiers more civil. So I appreciate that, but also I want you to talk to us a little bit about the negotiations with the Serbian army general, because I found it very interesting in the book that you constantly tell them NATO's going to come after you. In conversations, when you get the negotiations with the Serbian army general gets very heated, you ask things from them. You mostly also say to them, you can't injure my people. I am at risk with all my KVM monitors. And at the same time, you're telling them, you're warning them that the Hague is going to come after them. You may end up in the Hague, which they did.
A couple of them.
So what were they thinking? I'm interested in their mentality, the background of that mentality, negotiating with Milosevic. You were in meetings with him, with his army soldiers. Was there a shred of doubt in their mind when you were telling them you'll end up in the Hague?
No, I don't want to exaggerate and say I did that often, but in the aftermath of Reçakut, in the aftermath of some other things, I only dealt with one Serb general here, and I don't know if he was an active duty general or retired, General Lončar. I had met him in Croatia. He was the commander of a small Serb army unit that was left behind in Vukovar. And there we had a good relationship. When I came here, there was General Lončar to be my liaison to Belgrade on the military side. And several times, 2 or 3 times, when I met him, along with the head of the police here and 1 or 2 others, the stories that I was told about what had happened at Reçakut or what had happened elsewhere were so ridiculous that I quite often said, listen, if you stick to this story, you know, next time we meet, we're going to meet in The Hague. And the reaction from Lončar and from the others was always, you know, don't even mention that. Don't threaten us. You know, we're completely right in this. We're telling you what happened. Milosevic was a little different. I never told him we would meet in The Hague, although we did.
What did you tell him then? And what did he tell you?
In The Hague?
No, when you were meeting.
Number one, Milosevic always had 5 or 6 of his principal advisors sitting with him. They never spoke. Milosevic did all the speaking. Number 2, if I said I've heard that you know, the population of Kosova is overwhelmingly Albanian and small percentage are Serbs, Walker, you're wrong. You don't know. Let me tell you, there's more Serbs in Kosova than Albanians. And if you tried to bring up evidence that this was not true, he would just finish the conversation. In other words, if he said something was black and you looked at it and it was white, he would not give an inch. It was black. And all his advisors followed that line. And General Lončar did. But I think Lončar understood that the issues I was bringing to him were not black and white, that maybe there was some truth on what I was saying. Anyway, it was interesting talking to them.
So what did you tell each other in The Hague when you met?
In The Hague, when I met Milosevic?
Yes, hello from the other side.
The Hague, back in 2002 or 3, I can't remember when I went. It was interesting. Instead of meeting President Milosevic, where he's sitting surrounded by his team, there he was, the defendant. And we sat across from each other by maybe distance from here to the wall. We talked through something like this, instantaneous translation, very, very well done. Again, he treated the court as he had treated me, which was, Walker's testimony is all false, it's all lies, I'm going to tell you what happened. And he kept repeating his side of whatever issue we were talking about, and the court had to keep interrupting him and saying, defendant, please answer the question, because he would go off in different directions. And he didn't listen to his lawyers. He had a couple of lawyers sitting next to him. It was amazing. The only defense witness he called, he asked me if I knew Joe Blow. And I said, I have no idea who he is. And he said, well, he was a member of your team. And I said, wait, I had 1,200 people on my team. I didn't know them all. So they played a video from some guy who said that he had gone to Reçakut and he didn't see what I saw. And again, the court dismissed it as ridiculous. But that was the only defense he had while I was testifying. I said it many times, it was among the proudest moments in my 40-year career was to sit and face that war criminal and tell the world what I thought of him.
History doesn't usually end up like that.
No.
No.
But then the son of a gun died.
Died.
And he was not convicted of war crimes.
What do you feel about that?
I was disappointed. I had hoped he lived to be an old man and in a jail someplace. But anyway. Oh, the Panda Bar.
I'm interested in the Panda Bar story.
Okay,
You came in.
I was in
when the
Belgrade. I was in
incident
Belgrade with Dick Holbrooke, and we were there to see Milosevic. And the night Holbrooke came in, as we were preparing to what we were going to say to Milosevic the next day, we got news that there had been a very bloody incident, a battle, and in this case it was a battle on the border with Albania, in which a group of, what do you call them, gun runners were coming in with a lot of weapons for the KLA. And they had been encountered by the army or the police of Serbia and had been mowed down. And I can't remember how many were killed. It was in the middle of a very dark winter night, and the pictures the next day of the bodies was definitely of an ambush. Again, because all those that were dead were the Albanian gun runners. There were no one was killed on the Serb side, and anyway, it was a very bloody incident. The next day, in the morning, again with Holbrooke in Belgrade, we heard that there had been a, quote, a retaliation in the Panda Bar in Peja. And the story was, and we all accepted it, that as a result of what had happened on the border by the Serb army killing these, I can't remember, 25 gun runners.
KLA gun runners that were carrying guns.
Carrying weapons, carrying guns.
Were caught at the border.
They were caught at the border and killed, boom. So the next morning there was this shooting at the Panda Bar in Peja, in which I believe it was 6 young Serb teenagers were playing pool, shooting billiards, and masked gunmen came in and killed them all. And everyone, including Dick Holbrooke and I, assumed it was a retaliation for what had happened on the border. Holbrooke and I went down there, went to Peja immediately, and went to the Panda Bar, which was a crime scene, but there were no police around. It was just boarded up. And we looked in the window, and you could see the bullet holes, and there had obviously been a shooting. And that was pretty much the end of it. The press that was there, the journalists that were there, wanted to question me because I had made a statement in Belgrade saying we'd heard about the Panda Bar, we'd heard about the incident on the border. As a KVM, we were against violence on all sides, and both incidents were violent. So the journalists at the Panda Bar, I think they were Serb, kept asking me, well, Ambassador Walker, do you put in the same category these two incidents? One was armed intrusion being repelled by a government saying these guys are coming in with arms. That's one thing. Is that the same as 6 young kids playing pool being killed? And I again said, look, what I'm saying is violence. Violence is got to be avoided. Anyway, as you mentioned, it wasn't until years later, and I'm not sure exactly what Vucic said, but there was also an officer of some sort who came out and said, we did it.
It's a great... Clearly a great pleasure for all of us to have you here. I want to just point out, it's been a year almost we've opened this museum. We rarely had a 6-year-old waiting to stand through a historical lesson just to give you a present in the end of this. We've had, this audience is rare, and This is a testimony to your rock star appeal that you have in Kosovo. People are waiting to give you gifts, but I want to spend 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, the boy takes the floor. This is
my goodness. Hey, thank
the
you.
flowers he wants to give. This is the young people next to you are from a school that have done a portrait of you.
Oh my God.
Came today to give you the portrait. Can you show us the portrait? Let's see your art skills. And because William Walker gets all the glory, for 1 minute, let's just say thank you to Alma Kilmandi, who's here, his translator. So these were Alma and the Serbian translators. Faleminderit që ja ki kallëzu rrugën Walkerit. Nështë e kish hup rrugën pa ty, Alma. Roli I përkthyesve ka qenë I hatashëm, sakrifisa e tyne që e kanë bo me qenë afër të hujve, me kalu kapozbllloqet sërbe, me I duru provokimet sërbe, edhe në fund me adhone emnin në përpozbllloqe kush je, edhe me nejt në Kosovë mas kësaj. Me mia përkthyes ka nejt në Kosovë, edhe janë marrë pyetje prej ushtrisë jugoslave edhe policisë pse çka kanë bo, pse I kanë imu të hujve me pru NATO-n, edhe I kanë thonë, ju keni me pagu që NATO është na bombardu. Faleminderit Alma për punën që e ki bo. Yes.
2 words more. Can I just say 2 words? I want to introduce someone else here, and he's disappeared. The person who's most responsible for that book is not me. It's a guy that was sitting there right now.
He's
Hasan
hiding.
Salihu, that guy right there.
Hajde Hasan këtu.
See?
Do me thënë, Hasani është Alma e pas luftës, kjo është Alma e luftës. I kanë imu me shkrujt librin.
He's worked so hard, he needs a cane.
Yeah. Jeta, thank you very much for this opportunity. As we all know, Ambassador Walker was, is, and will be a hero to all of the Kosovo citizens, even our babies who were not even born at the time. As we all know, Ambassador Walker has done a miracle, something that nobody else even dared to think about, but he did it. He was there, I was there with him because I was doing my job. One of the questions was, how did you feel when you saw the bodies? I can answer that as a woman, as a mother, soon to be a grandmother, I hope. It was the worst experience that Ambassador and I have witnessed. I'm talking about January 16th, after the massacre of Reçakut. But this gentleman here, he told me, he said, Alma, you and I have a mission to do. We have to see all the bodies because I have to witness the 45 bodies. I have to see them before I say something to the world. And of course, he addressed me because, I was a young woman, a mother of a 2-year-old baby. And I said, Ambassador Walker, wherever you go, I'm after you. So we went there, and we literally went body after body, and we looked at them like this, very close. Is that right?
Paul.
And it was not a nice picture. It was something that I will never, ever forget what his eyes and my eyes and the eyes of the other KVM missions witnessed. People shot at close range, children, ladies, old people, men, women. These were not KLA people, these were simple villagers. Shot at very close range. I have to say that it was horrifying what we saw. We did witness the 45 bodies together, and then he just told me go there because I was in tears, I was shaking because it was very scary to see. It's a nightmare. It's something that even if you see in a movie, you get emotional. And then this hero of ours, he told me, you stay there, young lady, because you've done your work. And he continued with his most famous sentence, what I've seen today is crime against humanity. He said it because he felt it. It came from the depth of his soul. Thank you, Ambassador Walker, for everything. We will never, ever, as Kosovo, be able to return to you what you did to us.
Thank you.
Never.
Thanks. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Kaq kemi për sot sa i përket diskutimit me William Walker. Faleminderit.